Okay, today's video I have titled, I Am a Miracle Hog, and I'll explain that to you here in just a minute. I was getting all ready to do a lesson, the next lesson, which I'd prepared before for my grandkids and stuff, and it's one of my favorites, but we'll do it the next time. But while I was getting ready, God just prompted me, and he said, I think it's time for you to tell your story. The way I came with the title, I'm a Miracle Hog, is my son, who is my engineer technologist here, him and I were talking about putting these videos together, and we were trying to think of why would people even think they should listen to me. And so he started asking me about different stories he'd heard me tell throughout his life about my life. When we were done, I told him just gobs of stories, and I said, you know what? I'm a miracle hog, because God has done several miracles in my life. And that's what I want to share with you tonight. It ends up being great timing because we are recording this on Thanksgiving Eve. So in a way, I'm giving thanks to God for all the miracles and the wonderful things he's done in my life. My first miracle that I experienced, I don't even remember because it was before I was born. My mother went into the hospital in labor with me, and she was very sick. They were real worried about her. They did some tests and came back and they said, we're sorry to inform you, but the baby is gone because of this illness that you have. There's no movement, there's no heartbeat, so it's going to be a stillbirth. And then they told her, this would be a great experience for our resident doctors, and so we'd just like to ask your permission to have some resident doctors come in and witness this stillbirth, because for them it was a good experience. For Mom and I, it was not such a good experience. But then the doctor left the room, and my mom was by herself thinking about all that this meant and everything. And this little nun came into the room, and she said, I heard what the doctor said. Can I pray for you and the baby? And she said a Catholic prayer for mothers and babies. And then she took the rosary from around her neck and she prayed that prayer over my mom and put this on her belly and said, if anybody can save this baby, God can. Well, so then they took my mom into the delivery room full of resident doctors, and I came out very much alive. And I believe it was because of the prayer of this little nun. And then even a more amazing addition to that story, 40-some years later, I'm in one of my first nursing jobs. I went to a prayer breakfast where a famous football coach was from Nebraska, Tom Osborne, if anybody knows Tom Osborne. He was going to be at this prayer breakfast, and I was so excited because I was going to meet a famous person. And while we're sitting around the table, this hospital where I was working was that same hospital I was born in, and there was the table that we had was where all the nuns were sitting. While we were waiting for the prayer breakfast to start, I said to some of the other nuns, this might be a good time for me to tell you my miracle birth story. So I told them that story about the little nun that came and prayed for me. One of the nuns that knew me, she turned to the nun that was sitting right by me. She was a short little nun, and she said, Sister Barbara Ann, who would have been the nun at the hospital in 1956 when Cindy was born? And that little nun, who'd been quiet through the whole time, said, well, I do believe that was me. So, even though I was excited to meet the famous person of Tom Osborne, I was even more excited to meet the nun that actually prayed for me and brought me back to life. And so that's my first miracle. And I just thank God for that. My second miracle was when I was 3 or 4 years old. My brothers and sisters were playing around with Drano. Now, I know in your day now, Drano was a liquid, but it used to be crystals, blue and white crystals. And you put them down your pipes and it cleared the pipes out. And actually what it was lye. That's what would clean those clogs in a pipe. Well, my brothers and sisters told me It's rock salt, Cindy. Try it. And we used to use rock salt to make homemade ice cream. You put it on the ice to slowly melt it and use the churn, and we'd sit for hours and churn that ice cream. And I love the rock salt. So being a little kid, I don't know any better. I grab a handful of that Drano and I pop it in my mouth. Well, you can imagine. Think of what it does when you pour it down your drain. It bubbles all up and it's corrosive and it cleans out clogs. Well, that's what it was trying to do as it went down my throat. So I was rushed to the hospital. All I remember from that incident was all these people dressed in white were hovering over me and looking down at me. They were pumping my stomach, trying to get the Drano out of my stomach. This was probably the first time they ever saw a kid who'd eaten Drano, because who does that? They were very concerned about me and didn't expect me to live. But I did. I survived eating Drano, which to me is another miracle of God. Then, when I was a teenager, my next miracle happened. You know, we all are kind of mixed up and messed up when we're teenagers, but I seemed to be extra mixed up and messed up. And a lot of it had to do with, I had a lot of unresolved issues, like this puzzle box we've talked about before. I had a lot of it in my life, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So I had actually made so many mistakes and messed up so many times. I just thought, I just think this world would be a better place without me, because I'm just going to keep messing up and I'm going to keep disappointing people and keep letting people down. And so I had actually sat and I planned my, but before that, God did some preparation work, which is what he's done with a lot of this stuff. And he had my sister and a youth pastor at her church talking to me as we planned her wedding, actually. And they kept telling me, give God a chance. Let him straighten your life out. And I was like, no, that's not me. I don't believe in that stuff. And I just remember this youth pastor kept saying, when you're at your worst, come to God. The day I had planned I got up and I thought, boy, if this isn't at your worst, I don't know what is. And it was a Sunday morning. And so I thought, well, I'm at my worst. So before I commit to this, I'm going to give God one chance. So I drove to my sister's church. And as I sat in my car outside the church, I said to myself, what could God do to show me that he's real and that he really wants to help me to straighten my life out and to convince me not to commit? And the thing I thought was, what I'd longed for the most in my life always was for somebody to hug me and hold me and tell me that they love me and to truly mean it. And so I said, okay, God, I'm going to church, but if you can get someone to hug me and tell me they love me and truly mean it, then I will give my life to you. So go to the church service. This was the Foursquare Gospel Church I've talked about before. And, it was a regular charismatic service, but there was nothing that caught my attention, nothing that nothing said about giving your life to the Lord. No, it was just a regular Sunday morning church service. And so at the end of it, I sat in my seat and thought, okay, that's it. I guess I'm going home and tonight's the night, So I don't like being paid a lot of attention to, so I was going to try to slip out the back real fast. But before I could, the pastor and his wife went past me down the aisle, and they were waiting to greet people as they went out the door. And I was like, oh gosh, now I got to talk to these people, So, but I come up to them, and the pastor's wife leans into him and says, oh, this is Janie's little sister. And that's my sister. and they were very close. So the pastor stood there and he goes, "Oh my gosh, you're Janie's little sister." And he put his big arms around me and just held me tight. And he said, "We love Janie, so we love you too." And I knew he really meant it. And at that moment, I knew that God had done another miracle in my life, and he'd done exactly as I asked him to do. And so I made a decision to not that day, but to give God a chance to straighten my life out. And that's what made all the difference in the world. So those are 3 amazing miracles, if you ask me. But then I go on with my life. Been married, I've had kids, I have failed relationships. My life is a mess again. And I feel like I'm back to my teenage years, and my life is so messy, I just can't believe it. How could it ever be so messy? Once again, I went to a counselor after seeing several worldly counselors, which I've talked about before, where I think all they do is ask you to help carry this burden of this ugly monster, to learn how to carry it around. Well, I went to this one counselor, and she listened to me. I just told her a few things that were going on in my life, how it was kind of crazy. I'd actually lost some time. I'd go days or weeks, and I'd just forget what was even going on during those times. And after she listened to me tell just a little bit of my story, she started explaining to me what it was like to have multiple personality disorder. And as she was telling me this, I just laughed at her at first, like, "Are you kidding me?" But as she was explaining how it was, she was explaining my life. And she didn't even know me. But she understood exactly the craziness of my life. And come to find out, what had happened when I was a young girl, I had put aside, but it was part of this ugly box that was there, was that I was by a cousin of mine repeatedly as a small child. And when that happens to a small child, one of their defense mechanisms, which we've talked about already, can be that they kind of leave the abuse situation, they leave it in their mind, and then they leave another personality behind. And that's what I had done over time. And that abuse had went on for so long that I had developed many personalities. One could handle abuse better than I could. One could hide better than I could. One could handle stressful situations better than I could. So those personalities would pop in and out of my life. And talk about having a crazy mixed up box of emotions and unresolved emotions. I was carrying a big, big, heavy load. So this counselor, even though I was so grateful to her that she helped me to understand what was going on inside of me, all she gave me really was hope that someday, when I was in heaven, that I would find peace and resolution to all this. But for now, she would just teach me how to deal with these multiple personalities and how to carry this box again, okay? Even as it got heavier and heavier. So, going through counseling month after month. But just as I've said, if you've ever gotten my book, Breaking the Bondage of Abuse, that's why I called it this. And it's called Finding Healing in the Book of Psalms. And the reason I was motivated to write this book is because God took me through a healing process similar to what I'm sharing with you by reading through the Psalms each month. And by doing that, he was helping me to look at each puzzle piece and to find healing in it. And month after month after month, I read through those Psalms, and it dealt with hopelessness, and it dealt with abandonment, and abuse, of course, makes you feel devalued. And with all my multiple personalities, boy, did I have a loss of identity. And then there was shame, a lot of shame attached to all of it, and a lot of guilt. So I really had issues with every one of the major woundedness emotions that we've talked about that can bring all kinds of anxiety, panic, and depression. So if you think you see me and I'm sitting here and I'm smiling and I look so happy, this is what I was dealing with on a daily basis. So I understand anxiety and I understand panic and I understand depression. That's why I share these lessons with you, is so that you can know how to help yourself and how to find healing. Well, then, after about 9 months of God and I working through these issues, finding healing in each puzzle piece, taking each one to God, then God brought me to a certain pastor. And all it took was I went up and he wanted to pray for me. And he said, "How much do you want healing?" And I thought, oh my goodness, you don't know how much I want healing. I am tired of dealing with all of this. I am tired of this mess. I can't carry this anymore. And so when he prayed for me and asked for healing, I received healing from all of this abuse. And I no longer needed any of the personalities because God had brought healing in each one of these areas over that 9 months of preparation. And I was a healed and whole person again, a one person, me. And I didn't need the personalities anymore. And I've never seen them again since then. Then my last miracle I want to talk about is one that happened just not too long ago. It was actually in 2020. And I know a lot of people say that 2020 was a terrible year. Well, it was a terrible year for me. One day was working as a nurse, a home health nurse, and going about a very busy day, and had worked a full day, came home and was putting my stuff all away. And then all of a sudden, I don't remember anything. I woke up or came to 2 months later. And, but what was happening during that time, I had had a headache for several days, and which happens to me a lot, or did happen to me a lot. I got headaches a lot. This headache actually turned into a swelling in my brain, and so I just lost all consciousness and remembrance of anything. So my family rushed me to the hospital, and they ended up taking me into surgery. And this is one thing you can't see because of my curly hair, but I have a shunt that goes down into my brain and it drains off the excess fluid from off of my brain. Like I said, I was out of it. I don't remember any of that for a couple of months. Well, during this time period, the doctors are telling my family that I likely have brain cancer, and the outlook was not very good. And so they were all trying to prepare for that and get accustomed to that. And they were wondering how I was dealing with it. Well, I'll tell you how I was dealing with it. I was experiencing another miracle, because while I was out of it, while they were wheeling me into surgery to put this shunt in my head, in my mind and in my heart, I was being taken to the gates of heaven. And 2 men were wheeling me on a hospital cart, and they were wheeling me up to this gate. And as I got to this beautiful, colored, shiny, sparkly gate, I started crying. And I heard God say to me, "Woman, why are you crying?" And there's actually a scripture that says that. And I said, "Well, Lord, I have so many relationships that need to be straightened out. I had a brother who wasn't speaking to me. Wasn't speaking to anybody in the family. I had ex-husbands that I hadn't straightened out relationships with, and just so many relationships, Lord, that I wanted to fix better the relationships with my children. And so as I laid there on that cart at heaven's gates, God said to me, "You are right. Relationships are the most important thing. And now I am sending you back to fix your relationships." And that's when I came to, is after he said that. And that feeling of euphoria of that I had been to the gates of heaven, and I had talked with God, stayed with me through my whole recovery time. And for quite a while, I couldn't even communicate it to people. But after a few months, I was able to tell people my story. And so that's my miracle of being brought back from the door of death. And I just thank God and praise God for that. And now I have even more stories, and I could go on and on. At this time, when I was sick, that's what I wanted to tell you. When I was sick, I lost everything. I was right in the middle. I had sold my house that I lived in. And so they had to go on with the sale of that house. Everything I owned, my family all got together, family and friends came and packed me up, and they stored all my belongings in a storage unit. So I totally lost my sense of home, okay? I was staying with sisters and then finally with my daughter, and all I had was a few clothes to wear and a blanket that was mine that I really liked. And just like I told you in previous videos, you need a few things to make yourself feel at home. And I did. I had a few clothes, I had a blanket, I had my own pillows, which were important to me. And so once again, I was going through a loss of identity. I didn't know who I was. I was feeling pretty darn hopeless in that situation. God still came through, and he brought me back to life, and he brought my brain back. And then in the middle of all that, this is another thing you don't know about me. You may think that this is a microphone, this little thing attached to my neck, but it's not. I lost my hearing during this time. They think that what happened was I had a virus, and the virus went first to one ear and then to my brain, and then it went into my spine, and then into my stomach, and then all of a sudden it came over and it took out this ear. So I'm totally deaf. But I was able to get a cochlear implant, which I have right here on my ear, above it's actually held with a magnet under the skin of my head here. That's another miracle. Everything was restored to me. I now have a house that I own, and my son lives with me. I have my book published. I have found healing in all of these areas still, and to where I'm able to tell other people about it. And my hearing has been restored. A cochlear implant to me is another miracle, because now I can hold conversations with people, and I can be here making these videos with you. So that's my story, and hopefully you'll see how I truly am a miracle hog. And I say that thinking, well, maybe I've taken other people's miracles. But you know what? God has miracles enough for everyone, and he wants to bring miracles into your life. So keep listening to the videos, keep going through the process of the BLT and the finding healing and the unresolved issues in your life, and you too will find that you can be a miracle hog too. And I invite you in. Thank you.